Marcus Chen had always prided himself on being prepared for anything. 23 years of military service, 4 tours in hostile territories, and a decade running security operations had taught him that survival meant expecting the unexpected. But, standing in the smoking ruins of what used to be Henderson's Premium Meats, watching 2 7-foot-tall alien women argue in what sounded like musical violence while a dead Krillian enforcer leaked purple blood onto his favorite boots, Marcus realized that maybe his definition of anything had been somewhat limited. The day had started normally enough. Marcus needed protein for his weekly meal prep, Henderson's had the best cuts in the colony, and his routine was sacred. Same time every Tuesday, same order, same polite nod to old Henderson behind the counter. Simple. Predictable. Exactly how Marcus liked his civilian life after decades of chaos. The first sign that Tuesday was about to become significantly less routine came when he walked into the shop and found Henderson cowering behind his meat slicer while 2 creatures that looked like they'd stepped out of a fever dream conducted what appeared to be a heated negotiation with 3 Krillian enforcers. The aliens wore form-fitting armor that seemed to shift colors with their movements, and their faces were a striking blend of human and something altogether more exotic: high cheekbones, slightly elongated ears, and eyes that held depths Marcus couldn't quite fathom. The Krillians, on the other hand, looked exactly like what Central Casting would order: 4 generic space thugs, all chitinous plates, mandibles, and barely controlled aggression. They stood in the classic intimidation formation Marcus recognized from countless security briefings, blocking the exits while their leader gestured menacingly with what was clearly an energy weapon of some kind. Marcus should have backed out quietly. Should have called station security. Should have done literally anything other than what his old drill sergeant would have called stepping into a steaming pile of someone else's war. But Henderson was 73 years old, had never hurt anyone in his life, and was currently hyperventilating behind a display case full of synthetic ribeye. Plus, Marcus really needed that protein. "Excuse me," he said, stepping into the shop with the same casual confidence he'd used to enter 1,000 potentially hostile situations. "I just need to grab my usual order and I'll be out of your way." The effect was immediate and dramatic. All 5 aliens turned to stare at him with expressions ranging from surprise to what might have been amusement. The Krillian leader chittered something that Marcus's translator implant rendered as roughly insignificant mammal presumes, while the 2 armored women exchanged a look that somehow managed to convey entire conversations. "Human," said the taller of the 2 women, her voice carrying an accent that made every word sound like music wrapped around steel. "This is not your concern. Withdraw." Marcus looked at Henderson, who was now making small whimpering sounds, then back at the aliens. "Well, see, that's where you're wrong. This is exactly my concern. This is my meat guy, and it's Tuesday, and I have a very specific routine that I'm not particularly interested in disrupting because of whatever interdimensional dispute you folks are having." The shorter woman, though at 6'8", shorter was relative, actually smiled at that. It was the kind of smile that suggested she found something genuinely delightful about Marcus's complete failure to grasp the gravity of the situation. "Your meat guy," she said, and now there was definitely amusement in her voice. "How wonderfully primitive. Zara, I believe we've encountered what the humans call local color." The taller woman, apparently Zara, sighed in a way that suggested this conversation was taking time away from more important matters. "Kess, we don't have time for anthropological observations. These Krillian scum need to be dealt with before they report back to their handlers." That was when Marcus realized that what he'd walked into wasn't just a negotiation gone wrong, it was a prelude to violence. The Krillians were shifting into combat positions with the unmistakable efficiency of professional soldiers, and the 2 women were doing the same thing, albeit with considerably more grace. Henderson whimpered louder. "Okay," Marcus said, raising his hands in what he hoped was a universally recognized peaceful gesture. "Let's all just take a step back here. I'm sure whatever this is about can be resolved without turning Henderson's shop into a war zone. This is a good neighborhood. Property values, you know?" The Krillian leader chittered something that definitely wasn't complimentary, then raised his weapon. Marcus's combat instincts, dormant but never truly asleep, kicked in with the same mechanical precision that had kept him alive through more firefights than he cared to remember. He dove right, rolled behind a display freezer, and came up with Henderson's meat tenderizer hammer in his hand, not his first choice of weapons, but improvisation had always been his strong suit. What happened next unfolded with the sort of choreographed violence that Marcus had only seen in military Hollywoods and fever dreams. The two women moved like liquid lightning, their armor shifting from matte black to mirror bright in the span of a heartbeat. Weapons materialized in their hands, not drawn, not produced from holsters, but literally materializing out of what appeared to be thin air. Zara's weapon looked like someone had crossed a sword with a tuning fork and, then, taught it to hum with barely contained energy. Kes wielded dual pistols that fired bolts of coherent light, each shot accompanied by a sound like crystal bells singing death songs. The Krillians never stood a chance. The fight lasted maybe 30 seconds, and, when it was over, the shop looked like a small tornado had torn through it while angry gods threw furniture around for good measure. 3 dead Krillians decorated the floor in increasingly artistic pools of purple blood. Henderson was still hyperventilating behind his counter, and Marcus was standing in the middle of it all with a meat tenderizer in his hand, trying to process what he'd just witnessed. "Well," said Kes, examining one of her pistols with the casual attention of someone checking their manicure, "that was refreshing. It's been too long since we've had a proper fight." Zara was methodically checking the bodies, her movements efficient and professional. These weren't just random enforcers. Look at their equipment, military grade, recent manufacture. Someone's escalating. Marcus looked around at the destruction, then, at Henderson, who was now sitting on the floor behind his counter making small rocking motions. "Is anyone going to explain what just happened here? Because I came here for meat, and now I'm standing in what looks like the aftermath of a small war." Both women turned to look at him then, and Marcus felt the weight of their attention like a physical thing. There was something predatory in the way they moved, something that spoke to parts of his brain that still remembered when humans were prey animals hiding from things with bigger teeth. "You didn't run," Zara said, and there was something like surprise in her voice. "Should I have?" Marcus asked. Because honestly, running didn't really seem like an option once the shooting started. Plus, Henderson's been selling me meat for 6 years. Seemed rude to abandon him during a crisis. Kes laughed at that, a sound like silver bells being thrown down marble stairs. "Loyalty to your meat vendor. How delightfully human." "My name's Marcus," he said, because proper introductions seemed important even in the aftermath of alien violence. "Marcus Chen. And, before anyone asks, yes, I'm probably in shock, but I'm handling it pretty well, all things considered." "Marcus Chen," Zara repeated, as if testing the name. "I am Zara Thelnara of the Voidwalkers, and this is my sister Kes. We are, how would you put it, soldiers of fortune." "Mercenaries," Kes clarified helpfully. "Very expensive mercenaries." "And those were?" Marcus gestured at the deceased Krillians. "Debt collectors," Zara said. "Representatives of a crime syndicate that has been attempting to muscle in on our employer's territory. We were sent to deliver a message." Marcus looked around the destroyed shop. "What message was that? Have a nice day?" "More along the lines of continued interference will result in significant biological reorganization," Kes said. "Though I suppose the exact phrasing gets lost in translation." Henderson chose that moment to finally find his voice. "My shop," he wheezed, staring at the carnage with the expression of a man watching his life's work dissolve into chaos. "My beautiful shop." Marcus felt something twist in his chest at the old man's distress. Henderson had never asked for this. Had never done anything more aggressive than occasionally shortchange tourists who didn't know better. He was just a guy trying to make an honest living selling meat to people who wanted meat, and now his world was literally in pieces around him. "How much?" Marcus asked. "Excuse me?" Zara said. "How much to fix this? The shop, the equipment, compensation for trauma?" Marcus pulled out his credit pad, already running numbers in his head. His military pension was decent, his security consulting brought in good money, and he'd been living below his means for years. "I've got savings." Both sisters stared at him like he'd just announced his intention to juggle live plasma grenades. "You wish to compensate this merchant for damage caused by our conflict?" Kes asked slowly, as if making sure she understood correctly. I wish to compensate Henderson for having his Tuesday ruined by space thugs, Marcus said. Call it civic responsibility. Zara was studying him with those unsettling eyes, and Marcus had the distinct impression he was being evaluated according to criteria he didn't understand. This was not your fault. Wasn't his either, Marcus pointed out. And Henderson's good people. Good people shouldn't have to eat the cost of other people's wars. There was a moment of silence that stretched long enough for Marcus to wonder if he'd accidentally committed some sort of cultural offense. Then, Kes started laughing again, but this time there was something different in the sound, something that might have been respect. Zara, she said, I like him. That's not necessarily a good thing, Zara replied, but there was something thoughtful in her expression. Kes likes dangerous things. I like interesting things, Kes corrected. And humans who don't run when the plasma bolts start flying are definitely interesting. Marcus was beginning to suspect that getting caught in the middle of an alien firefight was going to turn out to be the least complicated part of his day. There was something in the way both sisters were looking at him now that suggested his quiet, routine civilian life was about to become significantly less quiet and routine. Well, he said, because someone had to say something, this has been educational. Henderson, send me the bill for repairs. Ladies, it's been unique meeting you. I'm going to go find somewhere else to buy protein and try to pretend this was all a very vivid hallucination. He made it exactly 3 steps toward the door before Zara's voice stopped him. Marcus Chan. He turned back, already knowing this was a mistake. You mentioned you've been buying meat from this establishment for 6 years, she said. Which suggests you're a creature of habit. Predictable routines, familiar places, established patterns. Generally speaking, yeah. I like routine. It's peaceful. And, yet when presented with a situation that fell entirely outside your routine, when faced with armed aliens in combat, you didn't retreat. You engaged. Marcus shrugged. Seemed like the thing to do at the time. Kes was grinning now, and there was something predatory in the expression that made Marcus's survival instincts start sending up warning flares. Zara, remember what our employer said about finding local assets? Someone who understands the territory but isn't paralyzed by fear when things get interesting? Kes, Zara said, and there was warning in her voice. What? Kes spread her hands innocently. I'm just saying, how often do we encounter humans who don't immediately flee when faced with superior firepower? Most of them are smart enough to run. Most of them are smart, period, Marcus said. I'm starting to think I might be the exception. Oh, you're definitely exceptional, Kes said, and the way she said it made Marcus extremely nervous. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Before Marcus could ask what that was supposed to mean, his comm unit chimed with an incoming priority message. He glanced at the display and felt his stomach drop. The message was from station security, and it was marked urgent. Attention all residents, the message began. We have received reports of armed aliens conducting hostile operations in Commercial District 7. All civilians are advised to shelter in place until the situation is resolved. Security teams are responding. Marcus looked up to find both sisters watching him with expressions that were suddenly much more serious. I'm guessing you two don't want to be here when station security shows up, he said. That would be inadvisable, Zara agreed. Our presence here is unofficial. Meaning illegal? Meaning complicated, Kes said. We're not technically criminals, but our employment status exists in something of a gray area as far as local law enforcement is concerned. And if they find you here? Let's just say it would complicate our current contract significantly, Zara said. Marcus looked at Henderson, who was still sitting on the floor looking shell-shocked, then at the destroyed shop, then at the 2 alien women who'd somehow managed to turn his routine meet run into an interstellar incident. There's a service tunnel that runs behind this block, he heard himself saying. Maintenance access for the environmental systems. It connects to the old cargo handling area near the docks. If you can get there without being seen, you can probably make it to your ship. Both sisters stared at him. Why would you help us? Zara asked. Marcus thought about that for a moment. Because Henderson's safe now, and those Krillians were the ones who started shooting. Plus, you could have killed me when I walked in here, but you didn't. That counts for something. Most humans would turn us in, Kes pointed out. Claim the reward, let the authorities sort it out. I'm not most humans, Marcus said, which was apparently becoming his theme for the day. I'm the guy who tried to buy meat and ended up in the middle of an alien war zone. At this point, I'm just trying to get through Tuesday without anyone else dying. Zara studied him for another long moment, then nodded. Show us this tunnel. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of service corridors, maintenance shafts, and careful navigation around security checkpoints. Marcus led them through the bowels of the station with the same methodical precision he'd once used to navigate hostile territory, checking corners, listening for patrol patterns, and generally trying not to think about what he was doing. The service tunnels were exactly as he remembered them, narrow, poorly lit, and filled with the constant hum of environmental systems that kept the station habitable. They moved in single file, with Marcus in the lead and the two sisters following with the fluid grace of people who were used to moving quickly through confined spaces. You know these tunnels well, Zara observed quietly as they paused at a junction to let a maintenance drone pass. Used to do security consulting for the Port Authority, Marcus explained. Part of the job was knowing all the ways people might try to smuggle contraband on or off the station. And, now you're using that knowledge to smuggle us off the station, Kes said with amusement. How wonderfully ironic. I prefer to think of it as providing directions to tourists, Marcus replied. They made good time, and, within 15 minutes they'd reached the old cargo handling area. The space was largely abandoned now. Newer, more efficient facilities had been built closer to the main docking bays, leaving this section to gather dust and serve as emergency storage. It was also, Marcus knew, poorly monitored and connected to several external airlocks that saw irregular use. Your ship? He asked as they emerged from the service tunnel into the dim expanse of the cargo bay. Docking Bay 17, Zara said. About half a kilometer from here. Right. There's a cargo hauler route that runs directly there. If you time it right, you can probably make it without being spotted. They stood there for a moment in the dusty silence of the abandoned bay, and Marcus realized this was where they would part ways. In 30 minutes, he'd gone from routine meat shopping to aiding and abetting alien mercenaries, and now he was about to return to his normal life and pretend none of it had happened. Somehow, that prospect felt more surreal than anything else that had occurred. Marcus Chen, Zara said, and there was something formal in the way she said his name. You have aided us at personal risk and asked for nothing in return. This is not something we will forget. Yeah, well, Marcus said, feeling awkward. Henderson's a good guy. Seemed worth doing. Kes stepped forward then, and, before Marcus could react, she pressed something small and warm into his hand. He looked down to see what appeared to be a small crystal pendant, dark blue shot through with veins of silver light. A communication device, she explained. If you ever find yourself in need of assistance or if you simply grow tired of your peaceful, routine life, activate it. We will come. Marcus stared at the pendant. It felt heavier than it should have, as if it contained more than just crystal and metal. I don't understand. Perhaps you will, Zara said. Or perhaps you'll live a long, quiet life selling security consultations and buying meat on Tuesdays. Either way, the choice is yours. They left him standing in the cargo bay with more questions than answers and a crystal pendant that hummed softly against his palm. Marcus watched them disappear into the shadows, moving with the same liquid grace they'd displayed in combat, and wondered what exactly he'd gotten himself into. The walk back to his apartment took longer than usual, partly because he had to avoid the security cordons around Henderson's shop and partly because he kept stopping to look at the pendant. It was beautiful in a way that hurt to examine too closely, and it seemed to pulse with its own internal rhythm. Every time he tried to convince himself that the whole experience had been some sort of stress-induced hallucination, the crystal's warm weight in his palm reminded him otherwise. His apartment was exactly as he'd left it, clean, organized, and profoundly normal. Marcus stood in his living room, looking at the carefully arranged furniture and the precisely scheduled meal prep containers in his refrigerator, and realized that something fundamental had changed. Not in the apartment, but in him. For 6 years, he'd built a life around routine and predictability. After decades of chaos and violence, he'd craved peace like other people craved oxygen. He'd created a world where the most exciting part of his week was deciding between synthetic beef and cultured chicken for his protein intake. And, now, holding an alien communication device and remembering the way Kes had smiled when the plasma bolts started flying, that world felt small. Marcus spent the rest of Tuesday trying to convince himself that he was happy with small. He cleaned his already clean apartment, organized his already organized files, and prepared a week's worth of meals with mathematical precision. He did everything he'd done every Tuesday for the past 6 years. It felt like wearing clothes that no longer fit. That night, he dreamed of silver eyes and weapons that sang like crystal bells. He dreamed of moving through space like liquid lightning and facing down superior firepower with nothing but improvised weapons and stubborn determination. He dreamed of being useful again, of being something more than a man who bought meat on schedule and lived a life measured in comfortable repetition. He woke up angry at himself, at the sisters for disrupting his carefully constructed peace, and at the universe for forcing him to confront questions he'd spent 6 years avoiding. The pendant sat on his nightstand, pulsing softly in the pre-dawn darkness, and Marcus realized he was faced with a choice that would define the rest of his life. He could put the pendant in a drawer and pretend Tuesday had never happened. He could return to Henderson's shop when it reopened, buy his meat, and slip back into the routine that had kept him sane for 6 years. He could be safe and comfortable and, predictably, measurably happy. Or he could activate a piece of alien technology and see what happened when he stopped running from the parts of himself he'd tried to leave behind. Marcus sat on the edge of his bed, holding the pendant, and thought about what Kes had said about humans being smart enough to run. Most of them were. Most of them understood that survival meant avoiding danger, not charging toward it with improvised weapons and stubborn principles. But Marcus had spent his whole life being smart, and where had it gotten him? A quiet apartment, a routine life, and the growing certainty that he was slowly disappearing into his own safety. He thought about Henderson, cowering behind his meat slicer. He thought about Zara's surprise when he didn't run. He thought about Kessa's smile and the way she'd moved like violence was just another form of dance. Most importantly, he thought about the moment when he'd stepped into that shop and seen someone who needed help. He hadn't calculated the odds or assessed the risks or considered the consequences. He just acted, because that's who he was when he stopped thinking long enough to remember. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others. Marcus didn't know where that thought came from, but it settled into his mind with the weight of truth. He'd spent 6 years building a weak self, safe, comfortable, predictable. A self that could be protected by routine and distance and careful avoidance of anything that might disturb his peace. But that weak self wasn't him. It was just a shell he'd built around the parts of himself that were too dangerous to let loose in a civilized world. The pendant pulsed against his palm, and Marcus made his choice. The activation was simpler than he'd expected, just a gentle pressure against what felt like a concealed switch. The crystal flared to life, bathing his apartment in cool blue light, and, suddenly, the air itself seemed to hum with potential energy. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the light stabilized, and a voice that was definitely Kes spoke directly into his mind. Well, she said, and he could hear the smile in her mental voice. I told Zara you wouldn't be able to resist for long. I'm probably making a mistake, Marcus said to the empty air, feeling slightly ridiculous. Oh, absolutely, Kes agreed cheerfully. The question is, what kind of mistake do you want to make? The kind where you spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been, or the kind where you find out exactly how interesting things can get? When you put it like that. Excellent. We're currently docked at Bay 17. Our employer has just presented us with a contract that could use someone with your particular skill set. Which is the ability to think clearly under pressure and an alarming tendency to do the right thing even when it's inconvenient. There was a pause. Also, you know the local territory and have no outstanding warrants, which is surprisingly useful in our line of work. Marcus looked around his apartment one more time at the scheduled meals and organized files and carefully maintained distance from anything that might be dangerous or unpredictable or real. "I'll be right there," he said. The walk to Docking Bay 17 felt like traveling to another world, even though it was less than a kilometer from his apartment. With each step, Marcus felt pieces of his carefully constructed routine life falling away like shed skin. By the time he reached the bay, he was moving with the same fluid confidence he'd once used to navigate combat zones, and the man who'd spent 6 years buying meat on schedule felt like a stranger. Docking Bay 17 housed a ship unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. It looked like someone had taken a traditional spacecraft design and, then, asked an artist with questionable sanity to improve it. Sleek lines flowed into impossible curves, and the hull seemed to shift color depending on the viewing angle. Weapon ports were concealed with the same artistic flair that had gone into the overall design, creating something that was simultaneously beautiful and obviously lethal. "Impressive, isn't she?" Kessa's voice came from behind him, and Marcus turned to find both sisters approaching from the ship's boarding ramp. They'd changed out of their combat armor into what appeared to be more casual attire, though casual for alien mercenaries still involved enough concealed weapons to outfit a small army. "She's beautiful," Marcus said honestly. "What's her name?" "Shadow Dancer," Zara said. "And she's home." There was something in the way she said it that made Marcus understand that this ship represented more than just transportation or shelter. This was their place in the universe, their anchor point in lives that were otherwise defined by movement and conflict. "So," he said, because someone had to address the obvious question. "What exactly does this job involve?" "Rescue mission," Kess said promptly. "Simple extraction, minimal shooting, probably won't involve interdimensional travel." "Probably?" "Well," Zara said with what might have been embarrassment, "our employer's daughter has been kidnapped by pirates who may or may not have access to experimental phase technology." "And you need someone with local knowledge because?" "Because the pirates are based in the Tortuga cluster, which is technically neutral territory but practically run by various criminal enterprises that don't appreciate outside interference," Kess explained. "Having someone who understands local customs and can navigate the political situation could be useful." Marcus considered this. The Tortuga cluster was infamous throughout the sector as a haven for smugglers, pirates, and various other individuals whose relationship with galactic law was complicated at best. It was also, he happened to know from his security consulting days, a place where the wrong word or gesture could start wars between factions that had been feuding since before humans had discovered interstellar travel. "What makes you think I know anything about Tortuga?" he asked. "Because," Zara said, "your personnel file indicates you spent 3 years running security for merchant convoys that traded in neutral zones. Which means you've dealt with pirates before." Marcus blinked. "You have my personnel file?" "We have everyone's personnel file," Kess said cheerfully. "It's amazing what you can access when you have the right contacts and flexible ethics." "Right. And this kidnapped daughter, how old are we talking here?" 26 standard years, Zara said. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a xenoarchaeologist who was studying pre-contact ruins on Kepler 442b when her expedition was attacked. "Wait," Marcus said, pieces clicking into place. "Dr. Vasquez?" "As in Professor Miguel Vasquez, the guy who discovered the first evidence of the Forerunner civilization?" "Her father, yes. Which explains why the ransom demand is for his complete research archive rather than money." Marcus whistled softly. Professor Vasquez's research was worth more than most planets' annual GDP, representing decades of work on the galaxy's most significant archaeological discoveries. If pirates had gotten their hands on his daughter. "This is way above my pay grade," he said. "That's what makes it interesting," Kess said with that predatory smile. "Besides, we're not asking you to single-handedly assault a pirate stronghold. We just need someone who can help us navigate the social and political complexities of Tortuga without accidentally starting a war." "What she means," Zara clarified, "is that Kess's approach to diplomacy tends to involve creative threats and implied violence, which works well in most circumstances but could be counterproductive in a place where everyone is armed and trigger-happy." "I prefer to think of it as aggressive negotiation," Kess said. But, fine, yes, I may not be the ideal choice for subtle infiltration work. Marcus looked from one sister to the other, then, at the ship that would carry them into the most dangerous region of known space to attempt a rescue that would almost certainly involve significant personal risk and, quite possibly, interdimensional complications. "What's the pay?" he asked. "Standard mercenary rates plus hazard compensation," Zara said. 50,000 credits base, plus bonuses for successful completion and minimal collateral damage. Marcus thought about his apartment, his routine, his carefully scheduled meals and organized files. He thought about Henderson, still probably traumatized from having his shop turned into a war zone. He thought about Dr. Elena Vasquez, 26 years old and trapped somewhere in pirate-controlled space while her father's life work hung in the balance. Most of all, he thought about the way it had felt to move with purpose again, to be useful, to be someone who solved problems instead of avoiding them. "When do we leave?" he said. Cass clapped her hands together with obvious delight. "Oh, this is going to be fun." "Cass," Zara said warningly. "What?" "It is. We haven't had a good rescue mission in months, and now we have a human who's actually qualified to help instead of just getting in the way. Plus, if the pirates do have phase technology, things could get really interesting." "That's what I'm afraid of," Zara muttered, but there was affection in her voice. Marcus followed them up the boarding ramp and into the ship, leaving behind the last traces of his civilian life. The interior of the Shadow Dancer was as impressive as the exterior, all flowing curves and organic integration of technology and living space. Everything had been designed for efficiency and comfort, but with an aesthetic sensibility that spoke to cultures and technologies Marcus couldn't begin to identify. "Guest quarters are on deck 2, Zara said, leading him through corridors that seemed to pulse with their own gentle luminescence. "We'll reach the edge of Tortuga space in approximately 18 hours, which should give you time to review the intelligence files and familiarize yourself with current political conditions." "Intelligence files?" Marcus asked. "Everything we know about the kidnapping, the pirates involved, and the general situation in the cluster," Kess explained. "Fair warning, it's not much. These particular pirates have been very good about staying off the grid." They reached what was apparently his quarters, a space that was larger and more comfortable than his apartment back on the station. A workstation against one wall displayed what looked like star charts and tactical assessments, while a comfortable-looking bed dominated the opposite corner. "I'll send you the files now," Zara said, manipulating some sort of control interface that Marcus couldn't see. "Review them, get some rest, and try not to think too hard about all the ways this could go wrong." "Is that supposed to be reassuring?" Marcus asked. "It's supposed to be realistic," Zara said. "We're about to enter a region of space where the local authorities are pirates, the political situation is held together with violence and mutual paranoia, and we're looking for one specific person among millions of potential hiding places. Plus," Kess added cheerfully, "there's a decent chance we'll encounter experimental technology that could theoretically tear holes in reality itself. But, other than that," Zara said, "it should be a perfectly routine rescue mission." Marcus looked around his quarters, then, at the two alien women who'd somehow convinced him to abandon his quiet life for what sounded like a suicide mission disguised as an adventure. "You know what," he said. "I think I'm going to like working with you too." After they left him alone, Marcus spent several hours reviewing the intelligence files. The information was indeed sparse, but what was there painted a picture of a carefully planned operation. Dr. Vasquez's expedition had been attacked with military precision, her security team eliminated with professional efficiency, and the kidnappers had vanished into Tortuga space without leaving any of the usual traces. The ransom demand had been delivered through encrypted channels that couldn't be traced, and the deadline was exactly 72 hours from the time of the kidnapping. No negotiation, no flexibility, just a simple exchange of Professor Vasquez's complete research archive for his daughter's safe return. Marcus studied the tactical assessments and political briefings, reacquainting himself with the complex web of alliances and feuds that kept Tortuga space in a constant state of barely controlled chaos. 3 major pirate factions controlled different regions of the cluster, each one technically at peace with the others but practically engaged in constant low-level warfare over territory and resources. The Crimson Fleet controlled the outer systems, focusing on hit-and-run attacks on merchant shipping. The Iron Brotherhood dominated the Central Worlds, running protection rackets and serving as a black market hub for stolen goods. And the Void Reapers held the inner systems, specializing in high-value kidnappings and information brokering. Any one of them could be holding Dr. Vasquez, or it could be a smaller independent crew looking to make a name for themselves. Without more information, finding her would be like searching for a specific grain of sand on a beach. Marcus was deep in political analysis when his door chimed softly. "Come in," he called, expecting one of the sisters. Instead, the door opened to reveal a small, floating robot that looked like a metallic hummingbird with far too many eyes. It hovered at head level, regarding him with what seemed like curiosity despite its mechanical nature. "Oh," it said in a voice like wind chimes, "you must be the new human. I'm Aria, Adaptive Response Intelligence Assistant. I help maintain ship systems and provide tactical analysis during operations." "Nice to meet you, Aria," Marcus said, because talking to floating robots apparently fell under the heading of things I do now. "I've been reviewing your personnel files," Aria continued, settling onto his desk with mechanical precision. "Quite impressive. 23 years military service, extensive experience with hostile negotiations, decorated veteran of the Kepler incident." "You know about Kepler?" Marcus asked, surprised. Most people didn't know the details of that particular operation, mainly because most of the details were still classified. "I have access to extensive databases," Aria said with what might have been smugness. "The point is, you have exactly the sort of experience we need for this type of operation." Cass was quite excited about your recruitment. "And Zara?" "Zara is cautious by nature. She believes humans are unpredictable and potentially dangerous allies." Aria paused, mechanical eyes focusing on him with unsettling intensity. "She's not wrong, of course. Humans have a remarkable tendency to do inexplicable things for inexplicable reasons. Such as volunteering for suicide missions to help people they've never met," Aria said. "Or abandoning comfortable, safe lives to run off with alien mercenaries they've known for less than a day." Marcus considered this. "When you put it like that, we do sound pretty crazy." "Crazy, perhaps. But also useful, under the right circumstances." Aria's mechanical wings hummed softly. "The galaxy is full of species that prioritize logic and self-preservation above all else. Humans are one of the few who regularly choose to act against their own interests in service of abstract principles. Is that good or bad?" "It's interesting," Aria said. "And, in our line of work, interesting is often more valuable than sensible." The robot left him alone after that, and Marcus returned to his research with a growing understanding of what he'd gotten himself into. This wasn't just a rescue mission, it was a test. The sisters were evaluating him, seeing if he could be trusted with the kinds of operations that kept them in business. The thought should have been intimidating, but instead Marcus found it oddly comforting. After 6 years of careful routine and measured safety, being judged on his ability to handle dangerous situations felt like coming home. He fell asleep sometime after midnight, ship's time, and dreamed of crystalline weapons and predatory smiles. But, for the first time in years, his dreams felt like promises instead of memories. Marcus woke to the gentle hum of the ship dropping out of hyperspace and the knowledge that the easy part of the journey was over. According to the star charts, they were now on the edge of Tortuga space, where galactic law was more of a suggestion than a requirement, and survival depended on understanding the difference between acceptable aggression and suicide. The ship's communications system chimed softly, and Zara's voice filled his quarters. "Marcus, please report to the bridge. We're about to make contact with Tortuga traffic control, and we'll need your expertise." The bridge was a study in controlled chaos, with displays showing everything from stellar navigation to weapons status to what appeared to be commodity prices on various black markets. Kes sat at what was obviously the pilot's station, her hands dancing over controls that responded to her touch with musical tones. Zara occupied the captain's chair, studying multiple data streams with the focused intensity of someone used to making life-or-death decisions based on incomplete information. "Sit there," Zara said, gesturing to a station that materialized from the ship's floor as he approached. "And, remember, in Tortuga space, we're just another mercenary crew looking for work. Nothing special, nothing threatening, certainly nothing that would interest the local authorities. What's our cover story? Marcus asked, settling into the chair that adjusted itself to his body with unsettling precision. Independent traders with a cargo of medical supplies and weapons, Kes said without looking up from her controls. Standard stuff, nothing that would draw attention. Medical supplies and weapons? That's not suspicious at all. In Tortuga space, medical supplies and weapons are the two most common trade goods, Zara explained. People get shot frequently, and they like to shoot back. A new voice suddenly filled the bridge, gravelly, hostile, and speaking with the sort of accent that suggested its owner had learned galactic standard from people who'd been punched in the throat repeatedly. Unknown vessel, this is Tortuga traffic control. State your business or prepare to be destroyed. Friendly, Marcus muttered. Kes activated the communication system. Tortuga Control, this is the merchant vessel Wandering Star requesting permission to dock at Freeport Station. We have medical supplies and small arms for trade. Wandering Star, transmit cargo manifest and crew roster for inspection. Marcus watched as data flowed across the displays, and realized that the sisters had prepared for this operation with remarkable thoroughness. The ship's identity had been completely altered, their cargo records showed exactly the sort of legitimate but suspicious goods that would pass casual inspection, and their crew roster listed them as experienced independent traders. Cargo manifest received, the traffic controller said after a moment that felt much longer than it probably was. Proceed to Freeport Station, docking Bay 94. Be advised that current political tensions are elevated due to recent territorial disputes between local factions. Understood, Control. Thanks for the heads up. The communication ended, and Kes began maneuvering the ship toward what Marcus assumed was their destination. Through the bridge's main viewport, he could see Freeport Station growing larger, a massive, ramshackle construction that looked like it had been built by committee using spare parts from 100 different civilizations. Recent territorial disputes, he asked. Someone's been hitting Crimson Fleet shipping in Iron Brotherhood space, Zara explained. Both sides are blaming each other, and the Void Reapers are trying to stay neutral while preparing for the inevitable shooting war. Which creates opportunities for independent operators, Kes added. Assuming they're careful not to get caught in the crossfire. And, we're going to be careful, right? Marcus asked. Both sisters looked at him with expressions that didn't inspire confidence. We're going to be professional, Zara said finally. Which isn't the same thing, Marcus realized. Not even close, Kes said cheerfully. Docking at Freeport Station was an experience that reminded Marcus why he'd preferred working with legitimate shipping companies during his security consulting days. The station's docking controllers were efficient but hostile, their inspection teams were thorough but obviously corrupt, and the general atmosphere suggested that violence was always just one misunderstanding away. The sisters handled it all with the sort of casual competence that spoke to extensive experience with places where the local authorities were indistinguishable from the criminals. They paid the appropriate bribes, submitted to the necessary searches, and maintained exactly the right balance of deference and confidence to avoid both suspicion and predation. Marcus found himself falling into familiar patterns from his military days, watching for threats, noting escape routes, and cataloging the various weapons he spotted among the station's population. Freeport was exactly what he'd expected from the intelligence files, a haven for cutthroats, smugglers, and pirates disguised as a legitimate trading post. First stop, Zara said as they made their way through the station's crowded concourses, is the Rusty Anchor. It's a bar that serves as an unofficial information exchange for independent operators. Translation, Kes added, it's where pirates go to drink and brag about their latest scores. And, you think someone there will know about Dr. Vasquez? Marcus asked. I think someone there will know someone who knows, Zara said. Information has value in Tortuga space, but so does reputation. If we ask the right questions in the right way, we should be able to learn something useful. The Rusty Anchor turned out to be exactly the sort of establishment Marcus would have avoided during his civilian years and felt perfectly comfortable in now. Dimly lit, poorly ventilated, and filled with the sort of people who carried weapons openly and spoke in the kind of hushed tones that suggested most of their conversations involved illegal activities. They found a table in a corner that provided good sightlines to both the entrance and the exits, and Marcus settled in to watch while the sisters began the delicate process of information gathering. It was like watching artists work, the way they identified potential sources, evaluated the local power dynamics, and gradually inserted themselves into the station's social ecosystem. Within an hour, they'd established themselves as legitimate traders with money to spend and information to share. Within 2 hours, they were being approached by various locals looking to make deals or test the newcomers' boundaries. And, within 3 hours, they had their first real lead. The Brotherhood's been moving a lot of personnel through this sector lately, a grizzled Korthani smuggler told them over drinks that were probably toxic to human physiology. Word is they picked up something valuable and want to keep it secure. Define valuable, Kes said with just the right amount of casual interest. High-end hostage, the smuggler said. Someone important enough that they're keeping her in the deep vaults on Blackrock Station. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. Blackrock Station was legendary in Tortuga space, a fortified asteroid base that served as the Iron Brotherhood's primary headquarters. If Dr. Vasquez was being held there, the rescue mission had just become exponentially more difficult. Any idea who the hostage is? Zara asked. Some kind of academic, the smuggler said with a shrug. University professor or researcher or something. Not my area of expertise, but the Brotherhood's treating her like she's worth more than most planets. After the smuggler left, the three of them sat in silence for several minutes, processing the implications. Blackrock Station, Marcus said finally. Blackrock Station, Zara agreed. That's not good, Marcus said. That's a significant understatement, Kes said. Blackrock is considered impregnable. Military-grade defenses, redundant security systems, and a garrison of some of the most dangerous pirates in the galaxy. Plus, Zara added, it's built into a fortified asteroid that's been hollowed out and turned into a fortress. Even if we could get close enough to attempt a rescue, the structure itself is designed to be a death trap for intruders. Marcus studied the tactical data on his portable display, noting the station's defensive capabilities with growing unease. Blackrock wasn't just fortified, it was a military installation disguised as a pirate base. Taking it by force would require a fleet, and they had one ship with a crew of 3.5. So, he said, what's the plan? The sisters exchanged one of their wordless communications, and Marcus had the distinct impression they were having an entire conversation in the space of a few seconds. We're going to have to get creative, Zara said finally. Define creative, Marcus said, though he was already pretty sure he didn't want to know. Well, Kes said with that predatory smile he was beginning to recognize as a warning sign, the direct approach obviously won't work. But, the Iron Brotherhood has always prided itself on running a legitimate business alongside their piracy operations. Meaning? Meaning they take contracts for security services, prisoner transport, and specialized logistics, Zara explained. If we could convince them that we represent a potential client. Marcus stared at them. You want to infiltrate a pirate fortress by pretending to be customers? It's not as crazy as it sounds, Kes said. The Brotherhood makes a lot of money providing services to people who can't use legitimate channels. Corporate espionage, political kidnappings, industrial sabotage, they're very diversified. And, if they figure out we're not really potential clients? Then, we improvise, Zara said. Improvise how? Aggressively, Kes said cheerfully. Marcus looked around the bar, noting the various weapons, the predatory expressions, and the general atmosphere of barely controlled violence. Then, he looked at the two alien women who'd somehow convinced him that infiltrating a pirate fortress was a reasonable use of his Tuesday evening. You know what, he said, raising his drink in a mock toast. I've had worse plans. Really? Zara asked, sounding genuinely curious. No, Marcus admitted. But, I'm trying to stay positive. Getting access to Blackrock Station turned out to be easier than Marcus had expected and more terrifying than he'd feared. The Iron Brotherhood's reputation for discretion and professionalism meant that they maintained regular office hours and accepted appointments from potential clients, provided those clients could demonstrate sufficient financial resources and criminal intent. Fortunately, the sisters had both in abundance. The meeting was arranged through a series of intermediaries who specialized in connecting clients with service providers in situations where both sides preferred to maintain plausible deniability. Within 6 hours, they had an appointment with a Brotherhood representative who would evaluate their needs and determine whether their business was worthy of the organization's attention. "Remember," Zara said as their ship approached Blackrock Station, "we're representing a mining consortium that's having problems with labor unrest. We need someone disappeared quietly, and we're willing to pay premium rates for guaranteed discretion." "What kind of labor unrest?" Marcus asked. "The kind where the workers have discovered that their employment contracts are technically forms of indentured servitude," Kes said. "And their leader is a charismatic academic who's been organizing resistance. So we're pretending to be the bad guys," Marcus said. "In Tortuga space, everyone's the bad guy," Zara pointed out. "We're just bad guys with money." Blackrock Station was even more intimidating up close than it had appeared in the intelligence files. The asteroid had been carved into the shape of a military installation, with weapon emplacements and defensive platforms that could probably hold off a battle fleet. Docking was a carefully choreographed process that involved multiple security checkpoints and enough scanning equipment to inventory every atom on their ship. The interior was surprisingly civilized, clean corridors, professional-looking staff, and an overall atmosphere that suggested the Iron Brotherhood took its legitimate business operations seriously. They were escorted to a conference room that could have belonged to any corporate headquarters, where they were met by a woman who introduced herself as Commander Sarah Voss. Commander Voss was human, which Marcus found oddly comforting until he noticed the cold intelligence in her eyes and the way she moved with predatory grace. This was someone who'd earned her position in an organization where weakness was terminal, and she evaluated them with the sort of professional assessment that made Marcus glad they were theoretically on the same side. "Miss Thelnara," she said, settling into her chair with fluid precision. "Your representative indicated that your consortium has a personnel problem that requires specialized solution." "That's correct," Zara replied, slipping into the role of corporate executive with unsettling ease. "We have a mining operation on Kepler 442b that's been experiencing significant labor unrest. The situation has escalated beyond what our internal security can handle." "Define escalated," Commander Voss said. "Work stoppages, equipment sabotage, and organized resistance to lawful management directives," Kes said. "Our profit margins are suffering, and conventional solutions have proved inadequate." Marcus found himself admiring the performance. Both sisters had completely transformed their body language and speaking patterns to match their cover identities, becoming exactly the sort of ruthless corporate executives who would hire pirates to solve labor problems. "And you believe the solution is targeted removal of opposition leadership?" Commander Voss asked. "We believe," Zara said carefully, "that removing certain key individuals would restore proper order to our operations." Commander Voss studied them for a moment that stretched long enough to make Marcus nervous. Then, she smiled, and there was something predatory in the expression that reminded him uncomfortably of Kes. "We've handled similar situations before," she said. "Discreet removal of problematic individuals is one of our specialties. However, our rates reflect the level of risk and the quality of our service." "Cost is not a primary concern," Zara said. "We're more interested in guaranteed results and absolute discretion." "Excellent. Our base rate for this type of operation is 5 million credits, plus expenses." Commander Voss manipulated something on her portable display. "However, given the remote location and the need for complete deniability, I'd estimate the total cost at approximately 8 million. Marcus tried not to choke on his drink. 8 million credits was more money than he'd made in his entire military career. "Acceptable," Zara said without blinking. "When could operations commence?" "That depends on the specifics of the target and the operational environment," Commander Voss said. "We'd need detailed intelligence on the individual in question, their security arrangements, and the local political situation." "Of course," Kes said, producing a data pad that had definitely not existed a moment earlier. "We've prepared a complete profile of the primary target." Commander Voss accepted the pad and began reviewing its contents, her expression shifting from professional interest to something approaching concern. Dr. Elena Vasquez, she said slowly. Xenoarchaeologist, daughter of Professor Miguel Vasquez. You're familiar with her work? Zara asked with exactly the right amount of casual interest. I'm familiar with her current situation, Commander Voss said, and, suddenly, the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Dr. Vasquez is currently our guest here on Blackrock Station. The silence that followed was the sort of silence that happens right before everything goes completely wrong. Marcus felt his combat instincts start sending up warning signals as he noticed the subtle ways Commander Voss's posture had shifted from welcoming to predatory. That's quite a coincidence, Zara said carefully. I don't believe in coincidences, Commander Voss replied. Especially not when they involve three independent operators showing up with a cover story that specifically targets our most valuable current asset. Marcus realized they'd been made, and his mind immediately started calculating odds and exit strategies. The conference room had 2 exits, but both were probably monitored. Their weapons were concealed but not immediately accessible. Commander Voss was almost certainly armed and definitely had backup within call range. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Kes said, but her hand was moving toward what Marcus recognized as a concealed weapon. Oh, there's definitely been a misunderstanding, Commander Voss agreed. The question is whether it's one we can resolve professionally or whether things are about to become unpleasant. That was when Marcus decided to do something that would probably get them all killed but was definitely better than sitting around waiting for the shooting to start. Commander Voss, he said, leaning forward with the sort of relaxed confidence he'd used to defuse hostile situations for more than 2 decades. I think we should discuss this like civilized people. Everyone in the room turned to look at him, and Marcus realized he'd just made himself the center of attention in a situation where attention could be fatal. But he'd committed to the approach now, and backing down would be worse than pressing forward. You're absolutely right that our presence here isn't a coincidence, he continued. We are here about Dr. Vasquez. But we're not here to hire you to kill her, we're here to negotiate her release. Commander Voss raised one eyebrow. Are you now? We represent her father, Marcus said, which was technically true if you interpreted represent broadly enough. Professor Vasquez is prepared to pay a substantial ransom for his daughter's safe return. The ransom has already been set, Commander Voss pointed out. His complete research archive in exchange for his daughter. Non-negotiable. Research archives can be copied, Marcus said. Money is more fungible and considerably less traceable. He was making this up as he went along, but the key to successful improvisation was conviction. If he sounded like he knew what he was talking about, maybe everyone else would assume he actually did. How much money? Commander Voss asked, and Marcus knew he'd managed to shift the conversation from immediate violence to business negotiation. 50 million credits, he said, picking a number that was large enough to be impressive but not so large as to be obviously impossible. The silence that followed was different from the previous one, less about to start shooting and more trying to calculate profit margins. That's substantial, Commander Voss said finally. Professor Vasquez loves his daughter, Marcus said. And he's willing to pay whatever it takes to get her back safely. But, Commander Voss continued, our client specifically requested the research archive. They're not interested in money. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. If the kidnappers weren't motivated by financial gain, that meant they had specific reasons for wanting Professor Vasquez's work. Which meant Dr. Elena Vasquez wasn't just a hostage, she was a strategic asset in someone's larger plan. Who's your client? He asked, knowing it was a dangerous question but needing the answer. Commander Voss smiled, and this time there was no mistaking the predatory intent. I think this meeting is over, she said, reaching for what was undoubtedly an alarm button. That was when Kessa's weapon materialized in her hand and everything went sideways very quickly. The next 30 seconds redefined Marcus's understanding of combat in enclosed spaces. Kes and Zara moved with inhuman speed and precision, their weapons singing their crystal death songs as they neutralized threats that Marcus barely had time to recognize. Commander Voss proved to be exactly as dangerous as her reputation suggested, her return fire accurate enough to keep them all pinned down while she called for backup. Marcus found himself behind an overturned conference table, clutching a liberated sidearm and trying to remember why he'd thought infiltrating a pirate fortress was a good idea. The answer, he realized as plasma bolts scorched the air above his head, was that he'd stopped thinking like a civilian and started thinking like the person he used to be. The person who'd charged into Henderson's shop when he saw someone who needed help. The person who'd spent 23 years solving problems that couldn't be solved with routine and safety and careful avoidance of risk. Kes. Zara called over the sound of weapons fire. How many hostiles? 8, maybe 9. Kes called back. They're trying to flank us through the secondary entrance. Marcus! Zara shouted. We need those blast doors sealed. Marcus looked at the control panel she was indicating, then at the hostile fire between him and his objective. It was maybe 10 meters, but it might as well have been 10 kilometers given the amount of lethal energy filling the air. Cover me, he called, and sprinted for the controls. Later, he would never be entirely sure how he made it across that room without being turned into component atoms. Between Kes's suppressing fire, Zara's tactical brilliance, and what might have been pure luck, he reached the control panel with only minor burns and a renewed appreciation for the difference between theoretical danger and immediate lethality. The blast doors sealed with a satisfying thunk, cutting off reinforcements but also eliminating their primary escape route. Which meant they were now trapped in a conference room with hostile pirates, limited ammunition, and no obvious way out. Plan B? Marcus asked, checking his weapon's charge level. Working on it, Zara said, doing something complicated with a device that had definitely not been part of their original equipment. Please tell me you have a plan B, Marcus said. We always have a plan B, Kes said, reloading with mechanical precision. Sometimes we even have a plan C. What's plan B? Blow a hole in the outer wall and trust that our ship can pick us up before we suffocate in vacuum, Zara said. Marcus looked around the conference room, noting the absence of anything resembling emergency life support equipment. What's plan C? Hope that plan B works, Kes said cheerfully. The explosive charge Zara planted against the outer wall was, Marcus realized, probably military grade and definitely overkill for the job. When it detonated, it didn't just blow a hole in the wall, it removed approximately half of that section of the station in a display of pyrotechnics that could probably be seen from orbit. The sudden decompression was exactly as unpleasant as Marcus had expected, but the emergency force field that snapped into place kept them from being immediately sucked into space. Through the hole in the wall, he could see the Shadow Dancer maneuvering into position with the sort of precision flying that suggested Arya was earning her keep. Jump! Zara called, and Marcus found himself following 2 alien mercenaries through a hole in the wall of a space station without stopping to consider the various ways this could go catastrophically wrong. The leap from station to ship was probably only a few meters, but it felt like flying through space with nothing but momentum and faith to keep him alive. He hit the Shadow Dancer's cargo bay hard enough to remind him that he wasn't 20 years old anymore, but he was alive and mostly intact, which was considerably better than he'd expected 5 minutes earlier. Everyone aboard? Arya's voice called through the ship's communication system. Everyone who's coming, Kes said, sealing the cargo bay as weapons fire from Blackrock Station began impacting their hull. Then, I suggest we leave, Arya said with mechanical understatement. Immediately. The next few minutes were a masterclass in combat piloting as Arya maneuvered them through Blackrock's defensive grid while return fire turned space around them into a light show of destructive energy. Marcus strapped himself into an acceleration couch and tried not to think about all the ways their improvised escape plan could still go wrong. They made it to the edge of the system before Zara finally allowed herself to relax, and Marcus realized they'd actually succeeded in the first part of their mission. They'd found Dr. Elena Vasquez, confirmed her location, and learned that the kidnapping was part of a larger operation involving unknown clients with specific interest in Professor Vasquez's research. Of course, they'd also made enemies of one of the most dangerous pirate organizations in the galaxy, destroyed part of a space station, and were now fugitives in Tortuga space with no clear plan for actually rescuing their target. So, Marcus said as they settled into hyperspace, how exactly do we get Dr. Vasquez out of Blackrock Station? The sisters looked at each other with expressions that didn't inspire confidence. We're working on that, Zara said. Please tell me you have ideas, Marcus said. We have lots of ideas, Kes said. Most of them involve creative applications of high explosives. What about the ideas that don't involve explosives? Those are significantly less developed, Zara admitted. Marcus settled back in his chair and considered the tactical situation. Dr. Vasquez was being held in what was essentially an impregnable fortress by professional criminals who were now actively hostile to their rescue team. They had one ship, limited resources, and approximately 60 hours before the ransom deadline expired. On the other hand, they'd infiltrated Blackrock Station once, which meant it could be done again. They'd survived a firefight with Iron Brotherhood security, which meant they could handle the opposition. And, most importantly, they'd confirmed that Dr. Vasquez was alive and being held in a specific location. Aria, he called. Do you have detailed schematics of Blackrock Station? I do indeed, the AI replied. Would you like me to display them? Show me everything, Marcus said. Structural layout, security systems, power distribution, life support, all of it. As holographic displays filled the lounge with three-dimensional models of the station's internal structure, Marcus felt familiar patterns clicking into place in his mind. This was what he was good at, analyzing seemingly impossible problems and finding the weaknesses that could be exploited by small teams with limited resources. There, he said, pointing to a section of the station's lower levels. Waste processing and recycling. Every station has to have it, and it's always lightly guarded because no one wants that assignment. You want to infiltrate through the sewers? Kes asked with amusement. I want to infiltrate through the path of least resistance, Marcus corrected. Which happens to be the waste processing system. Zara studied the schematics with growing interest. The processing centers connect to the main life support distribution network, she said slowly. If we could introduce a targeted neural agent into the air recycling system, we could incapacitate the security teams without killing anyone, Kes finished. I like it. Non-lethal, efficient, and gives us time to locate and extract Dr. Vasquez. There's just one problem, Aria pointed out. We don't have any neural agents. Actually, Marcus said, we might. Kes, you mentioned earlier that our cargo manifest listed medical supplies. What kind of medical supplies? Kes's expression shifted from confusion to delight. Anesthetic compounds, surgical gases, emergency sedatives. She grinned. Oh, this is going to be fun. The plan they developed over the next several hours was equal parts brilliant and insane, which Marcus was beginning to recognize as typical for operations involving the sisters. They would approach Blackrock Station disguised as a waste management contractor, infiltrate through the processing systems, introduce modified anesthetic compounds into the life support network, and extract Dr. Vasquez during the resulting confusion. It was, Marcus realized, probably the most complicated plan he'd ever been part of. It was also, given the circumstances, probably their best chance of success. One more thing, Zara said as they finalized their preparations. What do we do if Dr. Vasquez doesn't want to be rescued? Marcus looked up from the chemical formulations he'd been reviewing. What do you mean? I mean, what if she's not actually being held against her will? What if she's cooperating with her kidnappers for reasons of her own? It was a possibility Marcus hadn't considered, but he realized it made disturbing sense. Dr. Vasquez was a xenoarchaeologist who specialized in studying ancient civilizations. If the kidnappers had specific interest in her father's research, they might need her expertise to interpret and apply the information. Then, we find out why, he said. And we make sure she understands all her options before we let her make any permanent decisions. And if she chooses to stay? Marcus thought about that for a moment, considering the implications. Then, we make sure the choice is really hers, and we respect it. But we also make sure her father knows the truth about what happened to her. Zara nodded slowly. That's surprisingly wise. I try to save my stupidity for tactical decisions, Marcus said. Like agreeing to infiltrate pirate fortresses through waste processing systems. Hey, Kes said, it's a good plan. It's a plan, Marcus corrected. Whether it's good or not, we'll find out in about 18 hours. The second approach to Blackrock Station was considerably more nerve-wracking than the first, partly because they were now known hostiles and, partly because their cover story required them to actually dock with the station's waste processing facilities. Marcus spent the approach vector trying not to think about all the ways their plan could go wrong and focusing instead on the parts that might actually work. The waste management contractor disguise turned out to be brilliant in its simplicity. Every space station generated massive amounts of organic and industrial waste that had to be processed, recycled, or disposed of, and the work was unpleasant enough that most facilities contracted it out to specialized companies. The Iron Brotherhood, despite their reputation for violence and criminality, apparently maintained high standards for waste management efficiency. Waste Management Vessel Recycler 7, came the voice of Blackrock Traffic Control, "You're cleared for docking at Processing Bay 12. Be advised that biological contamination protocols are in effect." "Copy that, Control," Kess replied in an accent that suggested years of dealing with unpleasant industrial work. "We're equipped for standard biohazard processing." The docking process was routine enough to be almost boring, which Marcus found oddly reassuring after the violence of their previous visit. They were scanned, logged, and directed to a section of the station that was clearly designed to be as isolated as possible from the main population areas. "Phase 1 complete," Zara said as they made their way through service corridors that smelled exactly like what Marcus had expected. "Aria, how long do we need for the anesthetic dispersion?" "Approximately 12 minutes for full distribution through the life support network," the AI replied through their comm units. "Another 8 minutes for effective concentration levels." 20 minutes, Marcus said. "That's our window." The Waste Processing Center was a monument to functional engineering, all efficiency and utility with no regard for aesthetics or comfort. It was also, as Marcus had predicted, staffed by a minimal security team who clearly considered the assignment a form of professional punishment. 2 guards, Kess whispered as they observed the facility from a maintenance access point. "Both human, both armed, both bored." "Standard takedown?" Zara asked. "Non-lethal," Marcus said. "We don't want to leave bodies that might be discovered before the anesthetic takes effect." The guards never knew what hit them. Kess and Zara moved with the same liquid precision they displayed during the firefight, but this time their weapons were set for stunning rather than killing. Within 30 seconds, both guards were unconscious and secured in a storage closet where they wouldn't be discovered until shift change. "Aria," Marcus whispered into his comm unit as they made their way toward the main processing systems, "start the dispersion." "Initiating atmospheric infiltration," Aria replied. "Modified anesthetic compounds are now entering the station's air recycling network." Marcus checked his portable scanner and confirmed that the chemical levels were rising steadily throughout Blackrock's inhabited sections. Within 20 minutes, every person on the station would be unconscious or severely impaired. "Now we wait," Zara said. They waited in the processing center's control room, monitoring security feeds that showed the anesthetic gradually taking effect throughout the station. It was oddly anticlimactic, guards slumping at their posts, workers stopping in mid-task to sit down and rest, entire sections of the facility slowly settling into chemically induced sleep. "Security checkpoint 7 is down," Kess reported. "Detention level guards are taking an unscheduled break." "Command center is quiet," Zara added. "I count 0 active personnel in the main control areas." Marcus watched the feeds with growing satisfaction. Their improvised plan was actually working, and, within another few minutes they'd have free run of the entire facility. "Movement in Section 12, Aria announced. Someone in full environmental gear." Marcus felt his stomach drop as he switched to the security feed that covered the area near Dr. Vasquez's detention cell. A figure in sealed armor was moving through corridors filled with unconscious guards, apparently unaffected by the anesthetic that had incapacitated everyone else. "That's not good," he said. "That's really not good," Kess agreed. "Someone else is after Dr. Vasquez. Or someone was expecting us," Zara said grimly. "Either way, our 20-minute window just became a race." They made their way through the station's corridors with the sort of urgent efficiency that Marcus remembered from combat operations where everything had gone wrong but the mission still had to be completed. The anesthetic had done its job perfectly. Unconscious guards and staff members were scattered throughout Blackrock like sleeping flowers, their weapons and equipment abandoned but harmless. But the figure in environmental gear was moving toward Dr. Vasquez's detention area with purpose and speed, and Marcus realized they were about to encounter someone who'd been prepared for exactly this sort of rescue attempt. "Kes," he said as they approached the detention level, "what are the odds that this is a coincidence?" "Zero," Kes replied. "Someone knew we were coming. Or someone's been planning their own operation," Zara said. "Either way, we need to reach Dr. Vasquez first." They rounded the corner to find the figure in environmental gear standing outside Dr. Vasquez's cell, working on the locking mechanism with what appeared to be professional-grade cutting tools. The armor.